everybody. Welcome to the Good Evening Kitties podcast, a Tales from the Crypt review. My name is Melissa, your ghostess with the mostest, and today's episode is Season 2, Episode 18, The Secret. This concludes the end of Season 2, so after this, we'll move on to Season 3, but this episode's pretty fun. I thought it was a good way to round out the episode, to round out the season. But then I watched the episode probably like a week or two ago, and ever since then I keep walking around the house going, "A birthday party for you," like keep singing this song they keep singing, which I'll get to later, but that it's just been in my head ever since then. This one, like I said, is pretty good. As always, John Kassir does the voice of the Crypt Keeper and Danny Elfman does the theme song. This episode aired July 31st, 1990. It stars Larry Drake, who you would know from Dr. Giggles and the TV series L.A. Law. It also stars Grace Zabriskie from TV's Twin Peaks and Big Love, and Mike Simran from the movies Munchie and Casper. This episode is directed by J. Michael Riva, who is mostly a production designer for movies such as The Goonies and The Color Purple. The screenplay is by Doug Ronning, and I'm going to go ahead here and read the description for Season 2, Episode 18, The Secret. They let him into their home, not their hearts. An orphan is adopted by rich parents who hide a dark secret. And I have this, the thing I'm reading off of here is, just like a collection, the complete second season. But what's kind of a bummer is this is one of those times where they put the picture of what's kind of happening on it, which kind of bugs me because it's like, that's the whole point at the very end is that you see what's happening, and so you're like, oh, well, now I know what it is, so that's kind of a bummer. I hate when they do that, but like, this still is a really fun episode, and I mean, I've already seen it, so I already knew what was going to happen, but this one is pretty fun, so we'll go ahead and get into it here. So this one starts out, the Crypt Keeper is reading the book Oliver Twist, and he's in front of like this little lab setup that's kind of got all this fog, and not fog, but what's the word? Dry ice. And so it's neat. He's kind of going through just making a bunch of puns about Oliver Twist and Charles Dickens and, and things like that. But I really like the little lab setup in the background. It's neat. And he's just kind of in a little robe, chilling, just hanging out and reading. And so he brings in the episode for The Secret. And this one starts out it's kind of like it's an orphanage. It looks more like a house, but it's supposed to be an orphanage. And over the gate, it says Gaines Orphanage, which I'm pretty certain that is a nod to William Gaines, who is the publisher and co-editor of EC Comics. So I was like, oh, Gaines Orphanage, I noticed it right away, but it's mostly just like a nice house in a multi-story house in a nice little suburb, and it's a stormy night, and there's a little boy sneaking down the stairs, and there's some women talking in the background, and he's trying to be really quiet, and he always wears this little raccoon, coonskin cap. The runner of the orphanage is talking about how they have to keep these boys in line, and then there's a woman who works there named Miss Heather, and she's kind of talking like, they're just little boys, it's fine, and then the other woman's like, no, we have to watch them every second. I've been running this orphanage for 20 years, you don't know. And so Theodore sneaks into the kitchen, and he opens the fridge, and this part kind of is weird, because it's something that was always done. I remember this kind of in the movie Little Monsters and stuff like that, where he opens it up, and it's like, there's one piece of chicken on a plate, exposed, not covered. There's one single apple on a plate. Apples can be out on the they don't have to be in the fridge. And then there's like a glass quart of milk that's open. And I'm like, what is this? Like they're just making it even easier for him to get into it, I guess. I don't know. But I'm like, who leaves a piece of chicken on a plate and an apple on a plate? So he gets in there and he's like, oh yeah, food. So he just picks up this cold piece of chicken, he eats all the chicken, and then he just sets the bone back down on the plate. I'm like, I would have just got rid of all of it, then no one probably would have forgotten. Then he takes the apple and he shuts the door and he goes to leave, and he's sneaking out and he's trying to be sneaky, and the women start to head into the dining room that he's in. And so he runs to hide under the dining room table. And they're still talking and about how much these little boys are like going to be juvenile delinquents and how they have to keep them in line and all that stuff. And then she kind of brings up, the runner of the orphanage kind of brings up Theodore, and that there's something they need to do about him. He's the oldest boy there. He's what she says is well past the desirable age for placement. I'd say he's probably between 10 and 12. And all the other boys there are probably, between 4 and 9. He's definitely the largest boy there. He definitely stands out, and no one has, adopted him or anything. So they're trying, figure out how to get him adopted. And so Miss Heather asks what's happened to his real parents. And the other woman is like, we never ever mention his parents ever, or his behavior problems. So apparently he has some behavioral problems. And so during all this, Theodore's under the table there, and he ends up bumping the side of the table, and it scares him, and he drops the apple, and it rolls out and hits Miss Hagstead. And so Miss Hagstead, who runs the orphanage, gets the apple, it hits her foot. And she immediately finds him, and is like,
Theodore, out here. What were you doing here? You were spying, weren't you?
No, Miss Hagstead, I was hungry.
You little rat. Stealing food. While the other children sleep?
I'm bigger than the other kids.
Oh, and that gives you the right to sneak around in the middle of the night, does it?
So Miss Heather goes to take him to bed, back up to the room, and they make sure to lock him in his room with a key so he can't get out again. And so it shows that there's a full moon that night. So it's next morning, and Miss Heather's running down to talk to Miss Hagstead, and is like, Theodore's missing. I went to let him out of his room, and he's gone. And then Miss Hagstead's not even worried. So I'm assuming Miss Heather hasn't been there that long, maybe. But she definitely is nice. She's the best. Some of the stuff later, I'm like, oh, Miss Heather's so nice. And so Miss Hagstead is like, well, he'll be back. He does this. He gets little temper tantrums and runs off every once in a while for a few hours. And part of me, knowing already what this episode is kind of like, would you say he does that monthly? Or so. And so they get a knock on the door or whatever, or bell. And they go there, and Theodore's standing there in his pajamas, and he's all dirty and confused, and he's got his little coon cap. And Miss Hagstead's just like, go get cleaned up. He apparently he does this quite often. And he looks pretty sad about it. I mean, he's just kind of like, I don't know what happened. So then it kind of cuts to this cute scene where, Theodore and this other little boy are doing dishes and telling jokes.
What's the difference between boogers and broccoli?
I don't know.
Kids don't eat broccoli.
That's a good one, but don't tell that to Miss Hagstead.
Theo, I have some exciting news. Joey, why don't you run off and play?
Play, play, play. I never get to stick around for the good stuff.
And Miss Heather comes in saying she has some exciting news. And it looks like Theodore is going to get adopted. And so these people called the Colberts, who are very rich but very eccentric, come to adopt him. And right away he's standing there amongst all the boys, and he's the tallest one there. And it's kind of weird that they make them all stand out there like that, because I think they were planning on getting Theodore to begin with, maybe. I don't know. Or they thought they'd pick one. I guess maybe they thought they'd pick one that kind of stands out. And it's the best because Grace Zabriskie, I think is how you pronounce it. Zabriskie. She's really shining in this episode. She makes the episode for me, at least. The father is fine, Mr. Colbert. He kind of adds a little bit of mundaneness, but repeating what she says and just kind of yes, that's lovely. But she is completely her eyes are so great. They're very rich and they want to adopt him. And what's funny is Theodore mentions to Miss Hagstead, what if I don't want to go? He's like, these guys are scary. And they're like, shh, you have to go. And he's like, oh, okay, cool. And so Mrs. Colbert is like, wouldn't you love to go live in a lap of luxury and have your own room? And he's just like, can I take one of the other kids or something? And Miss Hagstead just wanted to get rid of him. So she's like, great, cool, go with this family.
Now listen to me, you pesky little Sputnik. If these people want you, you're going.
Where are my real parents, Miss Hagstead?
Your real parents? Oh, Theodore, they were killed when you were just a little baby.
How did they die?
Well, the details aren't important.
Poor Theodore does not look happy. He's a cute kid. And then there's a man back there behind him there too that you find out later. His name is Tobias, and he is kind of the Colbert's butler, and it's played by Larry Drake. He's a very strong, silent type. So they take Theodore home in the dark of night and take him to their house. And they live in a nice villa kind of thing. It's it's very nice. It's huge. I'm not sure why you need all that space, but they walk in and Theodore's like, oh, it's like a museum. He's like, this is crazy. And immediately they have this dog, and their dog does not like him. He comes in immediately. They have a Rottweiler. Theodore's told he can't touch anything. Don't touch anything. Everything's very old and antique. You mean like you guys? And because you're vampires? So they take him to his bedroom, and it's kind of a kid's dream. It's a nice big room, big bed, tons of games, and a train set that's running, and there's it's a little childish maybe, but I mean, it's a lot of fun toys, stuff that he wouldn't have had in the orphanage, and he's pretty excited. And so they they put him in there, and they're standing at the door and kind of okay, well, this is your new home, and they're shutting the door and locking it behind them. And he's like, oh, confusing. Like, he's just very confused. He's like, what is happening? And so he kind of like starts talking through the door like, what's going on? And they just kind of ignore and leave him there with all his toys. And so the next morning, Tobias introduces himself, basically saying, he's the Colbert's house assistant kind of thing. Theodore still has his little coonskin cap on in bed with his little jammies. And Tobias brings him, what people also think is every kid's dream. With personally, this part, it's always like a trope that kind of bugs me. Like that kids only want to eat sweets all the time. Because that's all he gets. Which at first you're like, okay, well this is definitely suspicious. He immediately gets like a piece of like strawberry shortcake for breakfast and with like some other stuff, and he's all excited. He's like, oh my gosh, I don't normally get this stuff ever. And he's like, well, can I have a glass of milk? And Tobias is like, well, how about a milkshake? And he's like, I think I'm gonna like it here. And I'm like, okay. Like, part of me's like, that's fine, but that's all they ever feed him. And it's like, that'd be fine for me for like a day, I think, as a kid. And then I would just be like, I feel so sick. Please give me a carrot. But that's like all they ever give him. And he's still having fun eating all of it throughout the episode. But I mean, even, he does get full, but it's like, I guess they're trying to fatten him up or make his blood sweet. Because, they're definitely vampires. Because they also they work at night. Okay, so like he never sees the Colberts really during the day. He only sees them at night, and that's when they say they have to work a lot. So, he kind of makes friends with Toby and stuff. And Toby tells Theodore that the Colberts collect antiques, and that's what a lot of their works and stuff is in. And so it kind of cuts to just some fun scenes of Theodore playing. He's in a little cowboy outfit, getting lots of sweets for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, playing toys. But, after a couple days or a week or so, that kind of starts to get old. And he's starting to kind of long for having other kids to play with and having someone to talk to and just cooped up in this room all the time. And as much fun as eating sugar and playing with toys is, he's starting to get kind of bored. So then later, they go out for a night walk. Theodore's dressed off, nice in a suit. And Tobias has the dog, and then the Colberts are walking with him, but it's dark. Which, it kind of looks like they shot it during the day and just put a filter on it. But it's in the dark, and that's when they take their walks. And I'm like, yep, of course they do. I'm sure Theodore's like, oh, thank God I got out of the room, And so he kind of asked Mrs. Colbert, he's like, why do I have to stay in my room all day, and why can't I hang out? And why can't we ever go to, like, the movies or go do something together? And then she's basically like, well, you're so precious. We don't want you to get hurt or getting lost in the woods. And we're planning a big surprise for you and all this stuff. And he's like, really? And she's like, yeah, we can't tell you it's a surprise. And he's like, okay. And so then later he's playing and Tobias comes in. He just took a bite of like a Long John donut. And then Tobias is in there like, lunchtime. I'm like, he just ate. And they bring him strawberry shortcake for lunch with chocolate sundae with extra syrup. And this part kind of stands out to me kind of sweet because the kid's like,
do you think you can come back and visit before supper?
I suppose I could come back and we could play a little cards or something.
Aw, he's so lonely. The poor kid's like, just anybody, someone to hang out with? I'm so bored. And so Tobias kind of becomes a little friend of his for the next week or so, like for a little while, and they play cards and stuff, and he ends up asking him if he can call him Toby because he had like a Toby at the orphanage, and so he really takes to calling him Toby right away, And so him and Toby are having fun and like eating jelly beans and playing cards, and even then like Tobias, Larry Drake, he's still got like he hardly ever smiles. And so as he's playing cards and stuff and with them, he's starting to think, about just how it was at the orphanage and feeling kind of sad. And this is the part where I was kind of like, oh, Miss Heather's the best, because there's this scene that he has a nice memory of where all the little boys are there and they're in their like, they have like little jumper kind of outfits on with suspenders, but they're all doing the dishes and they're all like blowing like they got soapy bubbles and all the kids are laughing and Mrs. Heather's laughing and they're playing in the bubbles and washing dishes. I'm like, oh, that's nice. They have like a nice little thing. And then Mrs. Hackstead starts yelling and they're all like, shh, we have to be quiet, and they're all laughing because Miss Hackstead doesn't know. And I'm like, Miss Heather's the best. And it really hasn't been that long that he's been here when you really think about it, which I'll get to in a little bit. So he asks where the Colberts are. Tobias goes, well, they're indisposed. And then all of a sudden they come in, and this is the part I've had in my head all week. And they come bursting through the door with this cake, right?
Where are the Colberts?
Well, they're indisposed.
Surprise! Hey, birthday party for you.
A birthday party for you. Happy birthday, Theodore.
And they like cut him a huge piece of cake, and he's like, what is this? It's not my birthday. And she's like, well, of course not. It wouldn't be a surprise. He's like, I'm not really hungry. I just had like a couple boxes of Cracker Jack, and like I'm literally going to go into a coma, you know? And so they're like, well, you can eat it later. And so they basically say that they're going to head out tonight to paint the town red, she says. And Tobias is like, okay. Like, he knows exactly what's going on. What I find interesting, too, I just noticed, she gets a little bit of the cake, like the frosting on her finger, and I don't know if this was intentional, but she wipes it off on like a napkin underneath his hand instead of licking it off her finger. Which, if you think about, you know, because they're vampires, like, she's like, ew, you know, like, human food. So, I thought that's kind of cool. And so they leave, and he's just confused with this huge piece of cake that's literally like a fourth of the size of the cake. And he's like, I don't know what to do. And so Toby takes the cake from him. So he asks Toby before bed, like, how long have you been working for the Colberts? And Toby says he's been working with them for a long time, since he was a young man. And that he also, you know, was an orphan. You know, he never knew his mother and father. And so it's about 9 o'clock now, the night that he's sleeping. And he's just kind of laying there, not really being able to sleep. Probably has a stomachache. He hears the voices outside the door, and it's the Colberts, and they're talking about, like, you know, we'll wake him when we return. I'll decide when our little orphan delicacy is ready. And they're like, I can hear his heart beating, and he's so sweet and everything like that.
Such a sweet boy. I don't think I can wait much longer. When we get home, we'll tell him our secret.
And so they decide they can't wait any longer, and then tonight's the night that when they get back, they're gonna give him their little surprise. And so now it's been some time later, and he's been sleeping, and all of a sudden the door burst open. And it's Tobias, and he's like, oh my gosh, we have to get you out of here. For me, I'm like, what took you so long? Like, you knew what was going down. It took you this long to the night, literally like the minute before they're gonna get there, that you now want to get him out of there. So he's like, wake up, we have to go. And immediately Theodore's like, I don't feel good, you know, and he's like, well, I'm sorry, we have to get you out of here. And he goes to carry him. And this is like the best part to me. He's coming down the stairs with Theodore, and he stopped carrying him, but they're running. And right at the corner is Grace Zabriskie. She's definitely more in her like vampire form, and she looks great. Like, she definitely does make this, her hair is all out now. Like, she was a little more reserved before, but she's in this black dress, and her face is just brilliant. And she's like, hello, boys, you know, like, where are you going? You know, and she bares her teeth. And basically what it is Toby, I'm assuming, worked with them for a long time as, like, their familiar kind of thing, you know, doing things for them, making sure they're situated. And in exchange, he would get immortality. But, I mean, by now he's like 50 years old. But apparently after tonight, I don't know if they'd done this before with other kids, but after this one, you know, they were going to grant him immortality because they wanted to eat this, you know, drink this child or whatever. And Toby's like, I can't do it anymore, and I don't want immortality. That sounds boring, and you guys are horrible and stuff like that.
Tobias, don't you want everlasting life?
Everlasting life. I can't imagine anything more tedious and boring.
And so Mr. Colbert shows up behind him, and this is the best because he actually has like a vampire cape on. Like, it's, you know, like it's the high neck black thing that's, I'm like, really? And he's got this cape on. It's very stereotypical. So the Mr. Colbert comes up behind Toby and bites him in the neck. And at that moment, to get past Mrs. Colbert, Theodore jumps barefoot off the side of the staircase and lands on the ground, and there's blood there, and he looks up, and Toby's like hanging on the side of the stairwell, and I'm assuming he's dead. I don't think they're gonna turn him. I think they're, you know, just killing him. And he goes to run out the door to get outside to, you know, and he's knocking stuff over, and the Colberts are like seeking their dog after him. They're like, Lilitu, leave some for us. And the Rottweiler takes off after him. And so I thought to myself, Lilitu, what is that? And so I looked that up. And actually, the Rottweiler's name, according to Wikipedia, is Lilitu, is a figure in Jewish mythology, often seen as a demon of the night who steals babies in the darkness and is a symbol of lust. And I was like, oh, kind of vampiric. I was like, okay, that's a good name for it. Yeah, I see that. Demon of the night kind of name. So I was like, that's cool. And so Lilitu chases Theodore into the woods. He's running as fast as he can, and the Colberts are closely after him. And they head off into the forest, and he kind of falls, and he's still not feeling too great, and he's kind of like cowered over in the grass, and the Colberts come up behind him. Theodore's got his back turned to the camera, and you can see he's starting to turn. He's getting like furry and stuff.
If we weren't already dead, Theodore, you'd be the death of us. Oh.
Now I know what happened to my parents.
I know why Miss Hagstead wanted to get rid of me. I have a secret too, Mrs. Colbert.
I'm sure you have, dear.
And mine is better than yours. I'm a werewolf. And I have an appetite for vampire.
I mean, his face looks really neat. They really did do the because he's like drooling and everything, and he's got all this hair. He looks really cool. And so he says he's a werewolf who has an appetite for vampires. And the vampires are like, what? And then he jumps after and attacks him and bites Mrs. Colbert in the neck. Pretty gross, like ripping out her neck. And then he looks up and he starts running quickly after Mr. Colbert. And Mr. Colbert's still running through the woods. He jumps and gets him as well. And then it cuts to black. And so I guess it had only been about another month that they've had him, that they've been fattening him up or whatever. But, you know, anytime there's a full moon, this whole time, he's been turning into this little werewolf and running around causing havoc and then waking up the next day like, what happened? Now, this time when he turned, the back of his shirt kind of busted open. So I don't know if that always happened when he used to turn, or maybe now because he's older, it's going to get more intense, like with puberty or something. I don't know, because I don't know how long he's been doing this. So yeah, it's only been like another month or so, I guess. It just so happens it happened to be the night he was turning. And he had never been awake to know, so he was like, oh my gosh. And so it cuts to black, and it cuts to the orphanage, and there's a knock on the door. So it's later that night, so he gets himself all cleaned up. And I guess maybe now he can control who he is, or maybe it's the next night, I don't know, because technically he should still probably be turned. That's kind of weird. But Mrs. Heather's like super excited to see him, and he's standing there and he's got Lolito on a little leash, you know, next to him, and he's standing there all proper. Miss Hagstead is immediately like, "You're back?" And he's like, basically, "I know my secret, Mrs. Hagstead, and things are gonna be different around here from now on." And Miss Hagstead's like, "Oh my god," you know. She's like, "No." So I guess this whole time Miss Hagstead knew, because he's like, Theodore's like, "I know what happened to my parents." And then he kind of like looks at her, and then you see like a picture of like a wolf appear on his face a little bit and scares her. I mean, I don't know what happened with his parents, really, like unless he ate them. I don't know. Or maybe they were killed. But he knows that his parents were werewolves, and it seems like Mrs. Hagstead kind of knew too. Or knew something, which I don't know why you wouldn't say something, but who would believe you, I guess. So Theodore's got the upper hand now. Miss Heather's apparently fine with that, and Miss Hagstead is scared, and he's going to stay at that orphanage probably for as long as he wants. Technically, he should just all move them back into the Colbert's house, really. So then it cuts back to the Crypt Keeper, and he's got a little coonskin cap now, and he's hanging out, doing the puns and stuff. Crypt Keeper, you're so punny. And the best Crypt Keeper pun is...
Just when Mom and Pop were about to satisfy their sweet tooth, Theodore decides to wolf down something besides sweets.
It's all about sweet tooths. His blood was so sweet. So yeah, that's the end of the episode there. There is a little bit of trivia. Larry Drake, the guy who played Tobias, this is actually his second appearance in the series. He played the Crazy Santa in season 1, episode 2, and All Through the House, which I thought was kind of interesting because they really look a lot different and act a lot different. So I was like, that's fun, because I love the Crazy Santa in All Through the House. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh, okay, because both those characters, Tobias and him, and the Santa, stand out for me. So I mean, he has some pretty pivotal characters. So I thought that was kind of fun. But yeah, that's basically the episode. It's a pretty fun one. It definitely stands out to me. I did remember it when I went to go look. I was like, oh, yeah, that's a fun one. I like that one. So that was Season 2, Episode 18, The Secret. Next episode that'll kick off Season 3 will be Season 3, Episode 1, Love to Death. Thank you for listening to the Good Evening Kitties podcast. If you want to contact me with any questions or comments or anything, email me at goodeveningpod@gmail.com. There's also a Facebook page for the Good Evening Kitties podcast if you want to like that. Also, there is now a Patreon page if you want to support the podcast monetarily. You can donate $1, or if you want to support the podcast monetarily and get a shout out on the podcast, you can donate $2. Thanks so much for listening. Please like, rate, review, subscribe, leave a review on iTunes. That really helps me out, lets me know you guys are listening. Thanks for listening.
I just had quite a scare.
Do you love video games but are tired of all the negativity surrounding the industry? Check out The Gaming Outsider, a podcast about video games by those who still love to play them. We strive to involve our community and even invite listeners as special guests to join in discussions such as what new games we've been playing, gaming news, and our weekly From the Outside In topic. The Gaming Outsider may not be industry insiders, but we take an outsider's look at our favorite hobby. And remember, there's no such thing as a bad game, just ones that aren't for you.